I absolutely love this level up animation. It is amazing. Yesterday was the start of reveal season and it was a wonderful teaser. However, it is really underway now because we got our first champion from the region of Shurima. We were given Renekton today, and he is a thick, scaly boy. He is a beaut. This is a crocodile that not even Steve Irwin wants to hunt. We also got a lot of answers. Yesterday's video, I had talked about how the teasers that we received were in many ways perfect because they required us to ask a lot of questions and they implied things that were coming. And some of those things were shown to us in today's reveals, and we're going to cover that. So I guess let's start with Renekton, kind of again the showcase reveal from today. This is a champion who has 3 levels, and again we kind of knew that that was coming based on some of the teasers from yesterday. But level 1 Renekton is a 4-cost 4/4 with Overwhelm. He has the Ascended tag. Now that is something that I had talked about yesterday, where I suspected Ascended, based on the way the cards were referencing those kinds of units, would be a tag similar to Poro and others. But he is a 4/4 Ascended with Overwhelm for 4. But he says, when I challenge an enemy, give me +2/+1 this round. But it's interesting because he does not have Challenger innately. Now he levels up from level 1 to level 2 when he has dealt 12 plus damage. Now that might seem like a lot because you're looking at the stats and you're like, okay, that's a, you know, essentially that's a successful 3 attacks, if you will. But there's a lot of ways that we can cheat this. Number 1, if you do have him challenging other units, he jumps up to a 6/5 with Overwhelm in doing so. And that's also now just 2 attacks that you need to be successful to get him from level 1 to level 2. Now, it's also worth noting that if you challenge something or you buff him and then you use cards like Single Combat, cards like Concerted Strike, those will help get the job done. He functions very similar to Shyvana in that regard. So, speaking of the whole Challenger thing, right? Yes, you can just give him Challenger with other effects that exist in, you know, Demacia, for example. Or you could give other units Vulnerable. Now, I'm going to talk about the other levels, but I want to say that his cards, so if you look over here to the right, Renekton's Ruthless Predator does grant enemies Vulnerable. And so again, that's going to be part of the theme. And I'll talk about that card a bit more, but level 2. So you go through all of this, you get this thick scaly boy leveled up to level 2. He's now a 4-cost 5/5 with Overwhelm, and on attack, so he no longer needs to be challenging anything, but just flat out on attack, give me +3/+3 this round. So he's casually, when attacking, an 8/8 Overwhelm. That's really good. And it's worth noting that because he gets that +3/+3, he's more likely to survive those combats. And again, if you're leveling him with the challenge mechanic, chances are you've got ways to either give things Vulnerable or grant him Challenger. So the fact that he has Overwhelm means he is a very threatening unit when he's running over opposing units with low health. He can really represent a lot of Nexus damage. Now, I fully see him being the kind of card that you might play in something like mid-range, but I also see him being similar to like a Darius and an Overwhelm style deck in certain instances. And I'm curious to see where this guy ends up, because he's got, in my opinion, he's got a lot of great tools that you would want to put into an aggressive list, or at least something that wants to go over the top, some sort of Overwhelm list. Pairing him with Noxus makes an awful lot of sense, because just recently in the Aphelios expansion, we got that fun card that makes your unit strike another unit, and then if your unit has Overwhelm, you deal the excess damage to the Nexus. And well, Renekton wants to deal damage to things. That's how you level up the level 1 version of him, and he definitely has Overwhelm. So again, could be a really nice pairing there. All right, level 3. So we've never seen champions go up to level 3 before, but Renekton definitely has a level 3, and it is an impressive level 3. So he's just a flat out 10/10 Overwhelm, no big deal. And then he has this skill that says when I block or attack, I deal 2 damage to enemies and the enemy nexus. Now, again, because he has Overwhelm, that damage should also then punch through just the same way that Gangplank does when you've leveled him up and his skill is triggering. So I struggle to think of a way you lose the game if you've leveled him to level 3 and I was gonna say attack, but again, this triggers on block. Like, I am stunned at how insane this card looks. So the real test is obviously going to be how easy is it to level him to level 3. Going from 1 to 2 is pretty standard. To go to level 3, his level up condition is you have to restore the Sun Disc. That was a card that was previewed yesterday, so that might be where you want to go in that regard. But I gotta be honest, even if I'm not playing a Sun Disc deck, his level 1 and level 2 are impressive enough that I would consider them. I mean, you know, a 4-cost 5/5 Overwhelm that jumps to an 8/8 on attack is good. You could end there and feel good about it, especially if you're playing an aggressive list where you don't necessarily care about restoring the Sun Disc, for example. Now, speaking of aggressive lists, I want to go back to his champion spell, but again, this is a spell that should just exist in the game as well. This is Ruthless Predator. This card is maybe my favorite card revealed today. I don't know, there's a lot of good ones today. This card feels insane to me. So this is a 2-cost burst spell. You give an ally +2/+0, and you give an enemy vulnerable this round. So this is a combat trick that could potentially let you push more damage post blocks. This is a combat trick that could allow you to trade up, giving, you know, a cheap 1-drop or a filler unit +2/+0 and then attacking into whatever you give vulnerable. This is a card in an aggressive deck that allows you to really push extra damage if you want to give the unit that is going to be free, you know, headed to the nexus, the +2/+0, and then when you give the enemy vulnerable, a different unit challenges it. So there's a lot of flexibility in this one card. This also targets an ally and it targets an enemy. So much like Troll Chant, and we've seen how good that card has been, this card could help you with Ezreal lists or help you with Taric lists or what have you. This card just feels like it does a lot for the cost, and my eye is going to be on this. I'm going to keep an eye out for ways that I can abuse it because, again, 2-cost burst, combat trick, granting something vulnerable. Obviously, this is a card that works well with Renekton because of his desire to challenge things, but just playing in general, I think this is a very versatile tool, and I know we have a whole set to see before we make decisions, but it would not shock me if this ends up being a very highly played card in Shurima because I like this card. All right, the last one in this bunch, there are more, by the way, but the last one in this bunch that was on this Riot provided, if you will, graphic. So I apologize, my face is covering Rite of Dominance a bit here, but this is the one that Riot made, and I didn't want to do double the work, so I stole it. Rite of Dominance is a 4-cost fast spell, and it says kill an ally or destroy a mana gem to give all enemies -2/-0 this round. Now, again, you talk about like interesting interactions. One, this card has the potential to fit in to like a Shadow Isles build because it gives you another way to kill an ally. So your 2-drop that wants to be a 4/3, for example, this is a great way to do it while also really hurting your opponent's side of the board. The destroy a mana gem is interesting because if you're playing this in a, you know, sort of a aggressive list as maybe like a one of, sometimes you don't care about hitting the top end of your curve, so maybe you do want to do the mana gem thing. It would also be interesting to see in the future if there are, you know, certain cards that trigger if you have less than a certain amount of mana. So destroying the gems could keep you under a threshold of sorts. I'm not saying that is a thing, but just from a design standpoint, interesting. We haven't seen many things that destroy our mana gems yet. Most of them have been, you know, gain mana gem, ramp, that sort of thing. So just kind of worth noting that this can destroy mana gem. Also, the -2/-0 is interesting because this feels like a control tool, and in a control deck, usually you do want to ramp into your late game bombs, and so the destroy a mana gem part doesn't feel great, but maybe the kill a ally fits in, who knows. But give everything -2/-0 feels pretty strong. Whether or not it's worth the requirement, we'll see. Again, my instinct says potentially a Shadow Isles tool, so I don't know, we'll keep that in mind. Now I'm gonna go ahead and change the graphic. So this is one that I threw together. This, man, I keep thinking about this level up animation. I hope this is the level 1 to level 2 and not the level 2 to level 3. I don't even know if they're going to have separate animations. I should actually be thinking about that as well, because we've never had level 3 champs. But regardless, I love the level up animation for Renekton here. But anyway, my face is not covering a card this time, so we can go through the rest of them. Bloodthirsty Marauder feels just like a power crept version of a card we've already seen. This is a 1-cost 3/1 with no stats, no tags, no whatever. But you know, as I've said a few times between yesterday's video and kind of hinted at for today's video, I hope to see aggro come back, because true aggro hasn't been super viable as of late. That's not to say you can't win with it, but it's certainly been missing from, say, like tournament lineups and ladder lineups, and it looks like Shurima is getting us back to form, and this is a card I would run in those lists potentially. Not a lot to say about it. It's just flat out a 3/1 for 1. Good. All right, Raz Blood Main. This is a 7-cost 6/6 with fearsome, but on attack you give enemies -2/-0 this round. So this is like the Shurima version of our sea monster that is sometimes splashed as a 1-of in deep decks, where, you know, again, it has fearsome, and then you are lowering the attack power of the opposing units, hopefully then allowing your fearsome units to go unblocked. I think that this is a very reasonable unit, 7-cost 6/6, but with a relevant keyword and a very powerful attack effect. It's interesting. I'm really curious about the cards and how they're going to pair with certain regions, because a lot of regions have overlap. So from like a region identity standpoint, for example, you look at like Ionia and Target, and they have a lot of overlap. They have healing, they've got elusive. You look at Shadow Isles and Ionia, they both have like the ephemeral thing. And this is done by design so that your regions kind of have a natural pairing. It helps for new players to kind of understand what goes with what. Again, you look at like Demacia and Shadow Isles, both have units that care about their units dying, and they both have activators for that. And so trying to figure out where Shurima is supposed to fit into the puzzle is going to be neat. And this card with the one, I'm going to put the other graphic back up here real quick. The one that I was just talking about, my face is covering, right? The Rite of Dominance. They both are looking like potential Shadow Isles fearsome companions. Now, normally when you play the fearsome deck, you go really heavy Shadow Isles because Wraithcaller is pretty clutch. But if we get enough fearsome support and units in Shurima to the point where you don't have to worry about the allegiance trigger there, maybe that's a thing. Who knows? So that's what I would keep in mind here, is that this could be part of a fearsome deck. We'll see. So next up, we have what I assume is pronounced Bakai Sand Spinner. This is a 4-cost 5/3, and when you play it, grant an enemy -1/-0 and vulnerable. Now that is grant, so that is a permanent -1/-0 and vulnerable. This card makes me feel really bad for Nocturne. Granted, Nocturne is a -1/-0 to the entire opposing board, and Nocturne is a champion, and there's a lot of upsides to Nocturne. But this is just straight up similar stats. You know, it doesn't have the fearsome, but you don't have to worry about the nightfall portion. This is a playable card. Nocturne is certainly playable, which means that this card not requiring nightfall and, you know, having this grant an enemy -1/-0 and vulnerable, this is a very playable card. I would keep my eye on this one as well. This one interests me. Certainly it pairs well with Renekton, who wants to challenge things, but he does compete at the same cost, right? So you're fighting with your 4-drops, but he still could be a nice pairing. Sometimes when you have two cards that you both want to play at the same time, the thing you have to remember about Runeterra is that you don't always have the attack token. So if you have the attack token on odds, right, 1, 3, 5, playing this guy on 4 into Renekton on 5 or vice versa is still entirely fine to set up that Renekton attack into something situation. So I think this guy is relevant, potentially playable. You know, I keep saying guy. It's got 6 arms and it's actually kind of gender neutral, so I don't even know if it's a guy, but this unit is good in my opinion. Next up we have Exhaust, and this is a 1-cost focus speed spell, and I'll talk about that in a moment. And this gives an enemy -2/-0 and vulnerable this round. Now, that's a really powerful effect for 1 mana, any way you slice it, in my opinion. But what you need to know about the card is that they have now codified what we would think of as gem speed. Before, gems, and I believe the other one was Whimsy, the card that Lulu creates, were very unique in how they were cast because they're burst speed, but you can't play them like in response to things or in combat. So in other words, if there are things actively on the stack. Now I know that that's not what Runeterra calls it, it's an old Magic term, but if you think about it as any time that you have locked in an action, so whether it's, you know, I've declared my attackers, or, you know, an opponent has played a spell, if there's an action locked in, then you cannot play focus spells. You could not play gems during that time, and in this case you cannot play Exhaust. Otherwise, burst speed. So great when you want to set up an open attack, for example. And you know, as I consider that, this card is good. This is a great card for cheesing out very beneficial open attacks where you either set up a value trade, or again, because of the vulnerable in an aggressive list, maybe you push through your better attackers. I like this card. I think this card, again, leads me to believe that there might be some kind of, you know, aggressive Shurima, and whether it's Noxus or Freljord, pairing with Overwhelm units, and then taking advantage of these ways where you're granting things vulnerable so that you dictate the trades and maximize your Overwhelm damage. I like this card. All right, we have Unworthy next. This is a 2-cost slow spell. You give an enemy follower -4/-0 this round, and if you have fewer mana gems than your opponent, you kill it instead. So do you remember before? Let me put that graphic back up. And I hate that my face is covering this card because I wanted to talk about it so much. Maybe I can do this, right? Do you remember when I said that there might be things that deal with thresholds? Well, there's not anything with a specific mana threshold, but there is a card like Unworthy, so we can go back to that deals with the threshold of your mana gems to your opponents. So I suspect we might see at least one other card that destroys your own mana gems, and that might become a bit of a theme in Shurima, because this is a really powerful effect. And so as we talk about the payoff for doing something that would traditionally hinder you, this is a great way to do it. Granted, it's slow speed, but spending 2 mana to just kill an enemy follower is pretty good. When you get to the late game and you can kill something like a Cythria or a Bright Steel formation, nothing says value like okay, you've played your Bright Steel, I'll just nuke it for 2. So I'm a big fan. Now, one thing that I am interested that I have not had clarified yet, and I apologize, I wanted to hunt around for card clarifications, and I normally do that on social media, but I've also been trying to avoid it because I haven't watched WandaVision yet today. So it's possible this has already been clarified, and if it has been, I apologize. But one thing that I don't know is whether or not when you destroy a gem, that's a permanent, like you're now under 10 cap, or if, let's just say hypothetically, I've destroyed a gem, so my opponent hits 10 on the turn I'm at 9. I don't know if the next turn thereafter I go to 10, or if once you would get to 10, you just stop gaining mana gems, because that would make this card a card where you have a window of opportunity to take advantage of being behind your opponent in mana. And it would mean that in the future, if you do go to that 10, you would then have to play another card to go back under 10 to take advantage of it. So I'm curious about how that works. I assume you just always gain a gem if you don't have one every turn, meaning you would have to juggle in the future that moment of like, I destroy a gem and then I use my stuff that cares about it and then I go back, sort of thing, because I think that creates more interesting game interactions and it makes you manage your timing and your resources in a more interesting way. So I suspect that's the way that it goes, but I don't know for sure. I couldn't find a clarification and I was trying to dodge spoilers, so I apologize. All right, last card that was revealed today. This is Quicksand. This is a 3-cost burst spell. You give an enemy -4/-0 and you disable its keywords, excluding any negative keywords this round. I think this is a really cool card from a design standpoint. I like it. I think that I don't know yet if this is going to be strong enough on its own. It feels close to Hush, right? That's my natural comparison. So as I struggle to think about the way to properly evaluate this card, my initial comparison is Hush, because this does say an enemy. It's not follower, so this can hit champions, and it doesn't outright silence it. So for example, you know, if Fiora kills something, she still gets credit for it. If Ezreal's popping off, yes, you shut down his like elusive keyword, for example, but his passive effect still triggers, right? There are reasons that exist in the game where Hush was relevant. Lee Sin's another great example. The Dragon's Rage would still trigger on attack. Let's just say we know that they always play burst spells and then attack, but let's just say hypothetically they didn't. They're playing like Lee Sin Aphelios and they started with, you know, playing a moon weapon and something else, and they have not yet locked in their attack. If you then Quicksand Lee Sin, he would lose the barrier, he would lose the challenger, but the Dragon's Rage would remain, right? This is the point I'm trying to illustrate here, is that the passive effects are still there, but this does give -4/-0 where Hush did not. Now, a lot of times Hush would still negate other buffs on a card. It was relevant in that regard, but this is like the additional -4/-0. And this does still get rid of the keywords, so it still lets you block elusive units, which is oftentimes something that, you know, was a benefit from Hush. This still gets rid of barrier, which is a great way to stop those Fioras, potentially stop that Lee Sin. Again, Dragon's Rage is the issue there, so you need something else with it, but I think that this card is playable, even if it's not completely Hush, but it fills a very similar role. And as a result, if you're playing any sort of deck that is running Shurima but does not run Targon, I would consider this as at least a 1 or a 2 of, to fill that same void, if you will. But that's the last card. So if you made it this far, thank you as always. For those of you who are still watching, I know I took a long break and then I had another break, and I joke that if I had as many videos as I had breaks, then, you know, maybe things would be going better. But for those of you who are watching, I really do genuinely appreciate you. and I have been checking the comments from the last video, so if you see something that jumps out at you from this one, then feel free to share it. I'm excited for a new expansion. This is my favorite time for card games, so I want to hear your excitement as well. Also, feel free to let me know if I missed something, missed a cool interaction. There was something I didn't think about when it comes to, you know, the unworthy and the gem interaction. If it has been shared and I just missed it as I dodged WandaVision spoilers, feel free to let me know in that regard as well. But, you know, thanks. I appreciate you, and I'll catch you for the next reveals.